Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for joining another SDEC session. This will be our final SDEC session for the year 2020. Excited that we got through almost 40 of these sessions starting even in June. So couple housekeeping items before I hand it off to Mikko. If you are not yet in the SDEC, maybe someone sent you this link and told you to check it out. In the chat, I put a link where you can join. It's free to join the SDEC. And if you join, you could tell us which topics you want to be invited to webinars for, and then we'll personalize that and make sure you get invited to any sessions related to the topics that you expressed interest in. During the session today, if you have any technical problems or questions just about the SDEC in general, I'll be monitoring the chat and you can go ahead and chat with me there. And my name is Adam Greco, by the way. And if you have questions for Mikko, please put them in the Zoom Q&A and we will tackle all of those questions at the end of the session. As always, this session will be recorded. So if there's something you missed or want to go check back later, it will be in the SDEC Slack group. And speaking of the SDEC Slack group, we still have about 30% of our SDEC members that aren't in the Slack group. So if you're in the Slack group, you can chat with other folks and you can see all of the past recordings, webinars. So if you don't know how to get in the Slack group or need any help, you can email us at sdec@searchdiscovery.com, and I'll put that in the chat as well. It takes just about 1 minute for you to join the Slack group, and you'll have access to lots of good information. So thank you again for joining, and I'm going to now hand it off to Mikko. Mikko, they're all yours.
Thank you, Adam. And I even remember to unmute myself. Okay, good morning, everyone. I suppose it's morning for most of you guys, or early afternoon. If you are in Europe, it's afternoon or late afternoon. For me, here in Helsinki, it's now 6:30 in the evening. It's been a pretty dark day here in Helsinki. We're just below the freezing point today. No snow, no rain, but just dark. So it's nice to have some evening program for me also. Even if I can't travel, it's always a pleasure to talk, even also in online events. My topic today is measuring online user experience with web analytics tools. It's something that we too often forget when we think about other things like conversions and sales. But first, only a few words as a warning about me. I'm not a developer. I'm more from the business side of analytics, even if I do a lot of analytics implementation. My background has nothing to do with IT. I have studied history and Latin and economics. A couple of years ago, I launched an agency together with a few friends of mine, and that means it's been a pretty busy 4 years as we have grown from 3 guys to 30 plus something. But in the last 2-3 years, I have been able to once again concentrate in doing analytics. In the beginning, I also had to do something else like SEO and PPC, but now I'm back in analytics and happy. And as you don't have a video, just a screenshot of with me. So nowadays I work with some of the biggest companies in Finland. Most of the time I help them to implement their web analytics tools. Sometimes I analyze the data, but more or less it's about analytics implementation and building dashboards. And something, well, that is something most of you are probably very familiar with it. That's the reality of analytics consultant's life. I decided that I don't want to speak today anything about Google Analytics. Basically, because everything is changing in Google Analytics, GA4 is coming. And the other fact is that nowadays I actually don't work that much with Google Analytics myself. I use Matomo Analytics and Pivot Pro. And with Matomo Analytics, the reason has been that I have been tracking mostly people that have been logged into, for example, insurance companies, customer portal, and so on. They don't want to send any data to Google Analytics. And that also means that I've been chatting and talking with different kinds of customers. I'm not anymore working with marketers. I'm working with the product side, product managers and developers. That means I'm all the time talking to new audiences in my consulting. And that means I have to find new ideas basically every week, new ideas about what to track and how to help my clients to improve their client portals or whatever I happen to be helping them at the moment. So I've been looking for new approaches. As I have been working something like 10 years basically only in marketing agencies. In the beginning, it was all about tracking conversions, tracking successes, helping the advertising team and marketers to tell stories about their great successes, how they have helped the client to outperform their competitors, how they are helping the client to sell more every week or every month when compared to last year's results. But now that I'm working with the product side and with customer portals, it's very different. I need to find new approaches. So I have found out that it's been really useful for me to talk much more about user experience than when I used to work with marketers and marketing departments of client companies. But when using any standard web analytics tools, they really don't help us to measure user experience. They have been built for marketers to track conversions, track goals, track e-commerce sales, and so on. That they really can't be used as such with a plain vanilla implementation, at least for tracking user experience. The metrics are not good for that. Page views as such don't tell much about user experience, and so on. So we need to track new kinds of things. And that's why I started to talk about anti-conversions. I've been telling my clients for a couple of years now that we should measure things that go wrong. We should not only concentrate in successes, but actively try to find things that go wrong in their websites. So what do? I track all kinds of UX problems and user interface problems as events, sometimes also as metrics. But in the beginning, let's start with a simple method of tracking UX problems as events. And it doesn't really matter if you are using Adobe Analytics or Google Analytics or Pivot Pro or anything else. The same methods can be used everywhere as long as you just have ideas about what to track. So, of course, we should track every page not found error. Well, for most analytics professionals, this is something really obvious, but almost with every implementation, I have to discuss with developer teams about whether we should track page not found errors in web analytics or not. Well, for example, just last week, the main argument against tracking page not found errors was that, yeah, but we track them in different kinds of log files in any case. Well, I was happy that the marketing team and product owners helped me by telling that, yeah, but no one never looks at those log files. We need to have the data in our web analytics implementation. Well, that's something really easy. Well, page not found is only one kind of error you should track. Almost any kind of user interaction can fail. The marketers usually track only submitted forms with their success events. But what about failure events? Very often, people like me have difficulties in submitting any website forms. I might, well, in any case, I usually write my name correct, but just yesterday I was trying to order a pizza, but I did a mistake when typing in my address. I wasn't supposed to write anything else but just the street in one field. No street number, no more details. And submitting the form failed. So you should track this kind of error messages in your favorite web analytics tool, whatever it is. It always helps you to identify issues with the user experience. What else? Site search. Yes, all of my clients have always tracked site search. They've been interested in finding out what kind of keywords people use or what kind of queries they use in site search and what people click after getting the site search results. But they rarely track site searches with 0 results. And that is something that is really annoying for me as a website user. I wasn't able to find what I was looking for. So track that also with a event, let's call it failure event at the moment. The same is true with all kinds of e-commerce sites. I might find the product, but then I find out that it's not available. If you don't track this kind of issues, you will never realize why your conversion rate is so low. If the reason is that you actually don't have the products. Well, a couple of years ago, I was working with one big retailer in Finland. They were really worried about their conversion rate because their conversion rate in their e-commerce site was something like 0.15, basically 10% of the standard e-commerce conversion rate in Finland. And we didn't know why. Everything seemed to be basically okay. Then we implemented tracking for products not available. And it turned out that more than 90% of the product views were for products that aren't actually available. Okay, you found the product, you add it into shopping cart as it was also available. Things might once again go wrong. Maybe your payment was rejected. Maybe it was a consumer credit company's website. Something happened. The credit application wasn't approved. In most standard web analytics implementations I have seen, the analytics tool doesn't have a clue about what is happening. We just have a bad conversion rate, but don't know why. So we should also send data about this kind of events that's not basically user interaction, but something that is caused by decision making in the backend. In most cases, the user, of course, sees that there is something wrong. She might see even an error message. So send the error message also to Google Analytics or Adobe or Pivot or Matomo. It'll help you to optimize the client website or your website. Page load times. Basically, every web analytics tool I have used in the last 10 years has some kind of metrics for tracking the page load times. Usually, or for at least in Google Analytics, it's based on a really small sample of page views. So that's not actually good enough for most users. You should track page load times for as many page views as possible. If you don't know how to do it, you could have a look at Yehoshua Koren's blog post from Analytics Ninja. There you will find details for tracking page load times for every page view. And another way to look at page load times is implementing the new Core Web Vitals as dimensions in Google Analytics or other analytics tools. For that, you could have a look at Matteo Zambon's blog post in Tag Manager Italia. And there are also other ways to track website users with a slow connection. You could use a simple JavaScript one-liner to get an idea about the connection speed and what kind of type the user is effectively having. Actually, I might be using, for example, a really fast broadband, but for some reason it could be tracked as even 2G when everyone here in the blog is using the same broadband provider as I'm using. And that is actually something that is happening very often now in the times of COVID. Actually, I'm pretty happy that I have been able to have the connection live for this first 20 minutes. It hasn't been like that most of the days. What else? Sometimes there are all kinds of error messages that are available either in the user interface, or in some cases they are not even available in the user interface. They might be just printed in the JavaScript console, or in some cases the user doesn't have a clue about what is happening. Something just seems to take a lot of time. Nothing is happening in the screen. You loaded the screen, maybe interacted with the website, but nothing happens. Behind the screens, there might be some slow API that doesn't answer the website, and effectively you don't have any content in your browser. You might send this kind of problems also to your web analytics tool. Once again, these are certainly logged in all kinds of log files behind the screens, but in my experience, only IT departments has access to those log files. They might have a look at them maybe once a month. If you are happy, there might be a dashboard somewhere people see all the time, but not always. And in any case, the marketers or communications people might have no clue at all about what is happening in the website if the people are actually seeing the content or not. So track also API related errors with your analytics tool if it's possible. Related to API issues, you could track also JavaScript errors with your analytics tool. It's really easy nowadays, for example, with Google Tag Manager, to send JavaScript errors as events to GA, whether to Universal Analytics or GA4. And you can do the same with any other web analytics tool. For example, I've been sending JavaScript errors to Matomo Analytics and no problems at all. One could argue, of course, that JavaScript errors have nothing to do with user experience. Well, they might have not, because if there are JavaScript errors, your site might be broken with a specific device category or specific mobile phone or with a specific browser. So track the JavaScript errors also with your web analytics tool. Just a warning here. If you have a lot of traffic and you are using free Google Analytics, it's really easy to overstep the limits of terms of service of the free GA and send, for example, 20 million or 50 million hits to your GA. So one way to work around this limitation is to have a separate GA property just for tracking JavaScript errors. Then sometimes the website is just so slow that the users become nervous. They click same buttons or same elements on the page several times, 2, 3, 5, maybe 7 or 10 times, and nothing seems to happen. You could track these as, let's call them rage clicks. So tell the developer to implement a JavaScript that tracks clicking the same user interface element several times in, let's say, 2 or 5 seconds or something like that. It should give you an idea about pages where there are some user interface issues or some other problems in user experience. Well, now you have implemented a lot of events to track all kinds of issues. In some cases, you might also have added some custom metrics to have even more or even better idea about what is happening on the site or in the browser, actually. And the next step, if you are using Google Analytics, you can use these events as goals. So usually we measure only successes as goals, but you could equally well track failures, anti-conversions with Google Analytics goals. Why would you do that? Basically, because then your web analytics tool will give you or will calculate you a couple of interesting metrics that are just giving a new interpretation. So, for example, if we track all the major user experience issues with a specific group of events, we can define them as macro anti-conversions in your web analytics tools just by tracking them as goals. And now that you have them defined as goals, for example, Google Analytics will calculate you a conversion rate that is not actually a conversion rate, but it's a rate describing how bad your website is. So I like to call it a suck rate, just to give it a name that people will remember. What about smaller issues? For example, if you weren't able to submit a form because there was some kind of validation issue, for example, I wasn't able to write correctly my address yesterday, it might not totally destroy the user experience. It is just something that is at least mildly irritating, just like viewing product pages for products not available. Well, Once again, if I define these as goals in Google Analytics and let the Google Analytics to calculate me a conversion rate, I just reinterpret it as irritation rate. It gives us an idea about what percentage of the users had some kind of bad, slightly bad user experience. You could call it friction or irritation or something similar. I like to call it irritation rate. And next, based on this kind of events, you could add some calculated metrics in your dashboards or in your analytics implementations. For example, if you track all clicks as events and calculate the ratio of clicks and page views, you could also use that as a kind of proxy for frustration. If you find out that there are pages where people click several times during one page view, but there are actually no interactive elements, then it could indicate that the user is somewhat frustrated. Nothing happens, and he or she is just clicking the page. What about tracking the ratio of page views and unique page views? I'm sure there is some official name for this ratio, but I like to call it confusion rate, because this ratio tells us or informs us how much the people move back and forth in the website. They're just looking the same pages over and over again. For example, moving back and forth in the conversion funnel. That might mean that they are somewhat confused. They weren't able to find something that they were looking for. Or in some other cases, it might of course indicate that people are, for example, just comparing products. But if you calculate this metric for the most important pages in your shopping funnel, then it should indicate some kind of confusion. It's an interesting metric in any case. So I use this kind of events, dimensions, and metrics and goals as kind of proxy for measuring how bad my client's website really is. They don't directly tell us much about why someone, or they don't tell anything about why someone feels that way, why people act that way, why they click 10 times a button on the page. But it helps you to find the pages where there most probably are some issues. So that is why I like to implement this kind of anti-conversions, events for irritation, failure events in my web analytics implementations. It helps me to identify if my clients' websites are catastrophic, or if they provide just a mildly annoying user experience. And that is, of course, something where you shouldn't stop. All that should just be the beginning of starting to optimize the website. But now you have a lot of many more variables you can use for optimizing the website. You don't have to look at only the successes, only the conversion rate, only average order value. You have metrics that help you to identify the possible, or identify the candidates for optimization, identify issues in your APIs, identify the issues in page speed, identify issues in forms and form validation. So if you start to implement this kind of metrics, you should have a lot to optimize in the next year or two. Thank you. And I'm happy to answer any questions. I'm sure Adam has already some to present me.
Okay, awesome. Thanks so much, Mikko. If anyone has any questions or comments or topics they'd want to chat about, please use the Zoom Q&A and post your questions there. One question I just wanted to start with is, Mikko, I've spent a lot of time dealing with clients that are trying to optimize and avoid that frustration. And one of the things that I've seen that you didn't mention here, but I assume you've played with around in the past as well, is using tools like Decibel Insight or Content Squared, like that basically record user sessions, and many of them actually can use JavaScript signals to identify like a frustration rate or something like that. And what I've done with those vendors is to integrate them with a Google Analytics or an Adobe Analytics so that you can, for example, find a problem on your website. Maybe it's getting people to move from cart to purchase. And then once you identify a problem with a segment in your analytics tool, you can then go back in and to the digital experience tools like Decibel and kind of see what problem, kind of watch the problem in action. Have you played around with those tools, and how does it compare to some of the stuff you've done in your calculated metrics with GA?
I haven't used those two tools you mentioned. I can't at least remember any of my clients would have used them, because I think here, at least here in Finland, some lower cost options like Hotjar and such are much more popular. But of course, combining these two sets of tools helps you to identify the issues. First, it helps you to identify or locate the problematic pages. But then what I like most with these more qualitative tools like session recordings and heat maps and click maps is that they are much better in communicating the issues to my clients. I can show my clients dozens of PowerPoint slides with numbers and metrics, but they rarely get people to act as quickly as when I'm able to show them a couple of session recordings from things going really badly.
Yeah, exactly. I have a saying I used to tell my clients where, you know, the famous phrase, a picture is worth 1,000 words. I used to tell them that, you know, a good screen recording is that you could show someone is worth 1,000 analyses, because you can really, it jumps out at them and it makes it real, especially for user experience people who just don't, they may think that this is the flow people should be going through, and they just don't understand why people wouldn't go the way that they thought that they should go, and so on.
And of course, I've got many of these ideas by playing with tools like Hotjar and now also with Microsoft Clarity. That is probably going to be a pretty interesting tool in a year or two.
Yep. Yeah, and I would just recommend everyone out there to, you know, if Hotjar is a great, you know, easy way to get started with that, because watching things and integrating that, I do believe there's a synergistic effect between your digital analytics tools and the replay tools. But let's get to a couple of questions here. So someone was asking, did you say that you can link core web vital stats in GA? How? And someone put a link into the tag manager Italia post. But is that cover what you were talking about, Mikko?
Yes, you can. There are some JavaScripts available that will identify or that help you to get the dimension for Core Web Vitals, and then you send it as dimension or metric, or a combination of dimension and metric to your web analytics tool. I think it was exactly the Tag Manager Italia's blog post.
Okay.
But there are a couple. You should be able to find at least 2 or 3 different solutions by just Googling for Core Web Vitals and Google Tag Manager.
Cool. Another question came in is, Have you ever thought about, or would you recommend integrating your insights from web analytics with your CRM or customer experience tools like surveys and feedback?
I've thought about that, but I think at the moment my clients are very suspicious of combining any data from web analytics with their CRM. Just now that we have news almost every week about some GDPR breaches in Europe with huge fines, my clients don't really want to combine two interesting sources of data. So that's unfortunate, but that would be really interesting.
Yeah, and I would say that I'll add to that on surveys and feedback. What you can do is if you use a survey tool, what's nice is that if you integrate the survey tool, let's say a survey pops up and there's a unique ID, you can pass that unique ID for that specific survey into your analytics tool, and then you can build a segment that says, I want to look at the visits just with, by ID. And what's interesting is you can actually, watch the specific page flow if you segment down to even just one session, and you could watch the visit that led to a poor user experience, and then you could start to see, if you could identify what happens. It's kind of like the next step down from being able to watch a session replay, but it is possible. And also, I think what's great about integrating the surveys is you could look at your conversion rate for your website, whatever your conversion is, and you could build one segment that says people with a positive survey score, people with a negative survey score. And once you do that, you can really start to see how the user experience has an impact, because ultimately everyone wants to have a good experience, but it's really difficult to put a dollar amount of how much a good and bad experience is. And that's why like one of the things I like about Decibel is they have an actual score. They score every visitor with a positive or negative number from scale of 1 to 10. And what's amazing is you could actually look at your conversion funnel where people had maybe a 7 or higher, and compare it where they had maybe a 4 or lower, and you can see the delta there. And if there's let's say there's a 5% conversion rate difference between the two, well, now you can extrapolate that with your yearly revenue for whatever your conversion is, and go to your bosses and say, this is how much money we are losing by having a bad experience, which then helps justify improvements in this area, which is really cool. So another question that came in is for confusion rate, where you're looking at distinct pages, how do you account for people who bounce back and forth between the search page and the product page legitimately while deciding what to buy?
Yeah, like I mentioned, it is very different when you are looking at product pages, for example, in e-commerce side, because there you are expected to move around and compare products and click view product images and so on. But this probably isn't so useful, for example, useful in e-commerce. But when you start to look at for example, what happens after people actually start the buying process, when they have a look at their shopping cart and start to enter their credit card information, then it's much more interesting.
Okay. Sorry. Anything else? So I was going to tell you the next question is someone had asked if you have a link to actually implement the JavaScript error tracking. I don't know if you had an actual link to that or a blog post that gives, is that what Yeshua's blog post tells you how to do?
I can't remember any blog posts about that topic. There probably is something, but for example, if you're using Google Tag Manager, there are triggers and variables, or standard triggers and variables for that purpose. So you can easily use Google Tag Manager's triggers and variables and send the data as events or as some kind of custom dimensions to Google Analytics. And the same is true for Matomo Tag Manager, and I suppose for most other tag managers.
Yeah, related to that, someone had asked a question. They were wondering if they heard correctly that you were using Matomo, formerly Pickwick, and if so, was that mainly for privacy reasons, or was there another reason for using that?
Just for privacy reasons, because my clients are either in, well, at the moment I work with one huge insurance company. For their public website, they have Google Analytics. And for logged in users, they are using just Matomo. And something similar with one client in healthcare, they are using Pivik Pro, the enterprise version of that same tool, or not actually anymore the same tool, because it has evolved or developed a lot. And then I also work with government and cities in Finland, and they just want to keep the data themselves. They don't want to send anything to Google or Adobe, or usually not even to cloud versions of Matomo Analytics. So it's all about keeping the data.
Yep, understood. So last question I have here is, do you have any insights on the best ways to define rage clicks within event data? So have you come up with a formula for rage clickers?
Yeah, no best practices. It's something I have done only a couple of times.
Yeah, I will say that is one of the ones that all of the session recording vendors do focus on. It's a pretty easy attribute to find when people, do that, because they record all the JavaScript and they know when you're clicking within a certain region. So that's one that they can cover pretty easily.
Because basically you can always identify the element that has been clicked, and if there are several clicks on the same element in a couple of seconds, then it can be categorized as a rage click.
Yeah.
And if you want to have a look at that kind of metrics without implementing anything new in Google Analytics, you can always try the Clarity, because I think there's a rage click metric.
Awesome. Okay, well, cool. Well, we're at time. So Mikko, thank you so much for joining and sharing some of your wisdom. For those on the call, this will be the last SDEC session of the year. We'll pick up again in January. Have a great holiday season, and Happy New Year. And Mikko, thank you again.
Well, thank you, Adam. And try to listen to other talks next year. I'm sure there will be many interesting presentations coming.
Yep. Okay, well, see you soon, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.